Let me tell you about a man named Gary. Gary grew up in a small town in Ohio. His dad worked at a manufacturing plant. One job, 40 years, same company. By the time Gary was 12, his family owned a home. A real one. 3 bedrooms, a yard, a driveway with a used Buick in it. His dad never went to college. His mom worked part-time at a diner. And somehow, on to modest incomes, they were fine. Not rich, fine, stable. The bills got paid. There was food in the fridge. There was a future on the table. Gary is now 34. He has a college degree. He works full-time. He makes more money in nominal dollars than his father ever did. And he cannot afford the house he grew up in. He looked it up. The same house, same zip code, is now listed at 4 times what his parents paid for it, adjusted for inflation. His salary has not quadrupled. Gary isn't lazy. Gary isn't bad with money. Gary is living in a system that fundamentally changed the rules while he was growing up, and nobody told him. That's what this is about. Here's the story you were sold. Work hard, spend wisely, save a little each month, and over time, you build something. A cushion, a home, some security. The math was supposed to work. It used to work. For decades, that formula held up reasonably well for a broad middle class of Americans. Not perfectly, not for everyone, but well enough that the myth felt true. Then, quietly, starting around 1980 and accelerating sharply after 2008, something shifted. Not in the behavior of the people trying to climb, in the architecture of the system itself. And by the time most people noticed something felt off, the game had already changed. To understand what happened, you need to understand one concept: asset inflation. And you need to understand why it hits different depending on where you start. When the Federal Reserve cuts interest rates, or pumps money into the financial system, something they've done aggressively and repeatedly since 2008, that money doesn't flow evenly through the economy. It doesn't show up as a raise in your paycheck. It flows into assets, stocks, real estate, private equity, things you can own, things that grow in value when money is cheap and capital is abundant. And here's the catch: if you already own those assets, you get richer automatically. You don't have to do anything. You just have to already be holding the right cards when the game starts. The Federal Reserve's own data shows that the top 1% of American households own more than half of all the stocks in the country. The top 10% own roughly 87%. The bottom half, around 67 million households, own about 1% of the stock market. Not 1% each, 1% total. So when the market goes up 16% in a year, which it did in 2025, the top 10% captured roughly $96,000 in gains per household. The bottom half captured about $2,000 from the same market, in the same year, in the same country. This is not an accident. It's arithmetic. Now layer housing on top of that. Home prices in America are up roughly 55% since 2020. If you owned a home in 2020, that's not a problem. That's a windfall. Your net worth grew significantly without you doing anything beyond the act of already owning property 4 years ago. But if you are trying to buy that first home in 2020, or 2021, or 2022, you are watching the on-ramp close in front of you in real time. Interest rates shot up to fight inflation, pushing monthly mortgage payments to record highs. Prices stayed elevated because existing homeowners had no incentive to sell and give up their low fixed rates. Inventory collapsed, and suddenly, buying a modest house required a household income that most households simply don't have. The people who had already climbed pulled the ladder up, not out of malice, just out of math. But here's where it gets personal, because none of this would be quite so brutal if wages had kept pace. If the money coming in had at least tracked the rising cost of living, people could have adapted, adjusted, found footing. They didn't. Last year, average hourly earnings were up about 3.6%. Inflation over that same stretch was running at 3.8%. So, the raise was real, and the raise was gone before it landed. The average American worker ran harder just to stay in place and finish slightly behind. And this has been the quiet reality for a long time. Since 1979, productivity in the American economy has grown by over 60%. Worker compensation grew by around 17%. That gap, the gap between what workers produce and what they take home, is where the divergence really lives. The economy got more efficient. The gains just didn't go where the work did. So, you have a generation of people who are told to do everything right. Get educated, work hard, don't overspend, and they did, and they are still falling behind. Not because of their choices, but because the relationship between effort and reward quietly got severed somewhere along the way. The predictable result is debt, not the aspirational kind, not people stretching for a vacation or a new car. The survival kind. Americans are now carrying about $1.5 trillion in credit card debt at an average interest rate of around 23%. According to Bankrate, a third of people carrying that debt say they're using it to cover basic daily expenses, groceries, utilities, the thing that keeps the lights on. More than 90 million Americans now use buy now, pay later services. A quarter of them have used those installment loans for groceries, not furniture, not a concert, groceries. The weekly trip to the store has become a debt instrument for a significant portion of this country. The personal savings rate has dropped to around 0.6%, near a record low. For the bottom half of the income scale, the savings rate isn't low, it's negative. They're spending more than they bring in every month, running a loss, building a hole. And when things break, there's no cushion. A medical bill, a car repair, a layoff. Things that used to be setbacks have become crises because the buffer is gone. There's a number that captures all of this more clearly than any chart. The average for a 1K in America just hit a record high, over $160,000. In that same period, a record number of Americans cashed out their retirement accounts early, willing to pay the 10% penalty, thus to access the money now. Of those early withdrawals, 36% were to avoid foreclosure or eviction. Another 31% were for medical bills. People are rating their future to pay for the present, and they're paying a penalty to do it. That's the math of desperation. That's what it looks like when the buffer is completely gone. So, we come back to Gary. Gary, in a symbol of failure. He's a data point in a structural shift. A system that once rewarded labor, savings, and patience now rewards asset ownership, capital accumulation, and existing wealth. The formula didn't stop working for everyone. It stopped working for people who started without assets, and it started accelerating for the people who had them. The stock market is at record highs. Net worth in America has never been larger. Consumer sentiment is at its lowest recorded level. And all three of those things are simultaneously true. For the same reason, they're measuring different Americas. Here's what nobody says out loud. The system is broken. Not for everyone. For a meaningful portion of the country, it's working exactly as designed. Assets are appreciating. Returns are compounding. Wealth is building quietly in the background while nothing is required but patience. The problem isn't that the system failed. The problem is that access to the system was never equal, and the distance between those with access and those without has been growing, steadily and structurally, for decades. So the question worth sitting with isn't whether you're doing enough. It's whether the rules you were handed were ever going to get you where you were told they would. Because Gary's dad didn't have a financial strategy. He didn't have an investment thesis or a diversified portfolio. He had a manufacturing job and a union card. And somehow, that was enough. And somehow, that was enough.